Control Resonant's combat is a massive departure from the classic Remedy gunfights of the original Control. The shape-shifting gun has been ripped out of your hands and replaced with the Aberant, a skeleton key of a melee weapon capable of unlocking enemy weaknesses, be that in the form of nifty dual blades or a defense-smashing hammer. With multiple forms to experiment with, numerous abilities to unlock, and an extensive skill tree to explore, the Aberant represents Control taking one step further into the realm of action RPGs. To learn how it all works, I spoke to the team at Remedy, all about Resonant's new combat system and the weapon that powers it all.
Zoe, I see the spotlights.
And you're getting closer. Listen, Dylan, we're getting distress calls from the theater, but research thinks we might have a Resonant on our hands.
Having now played 3 or so hours of Control Resonant, I can confirm that whatever form the Aberant takes, it's a joy to cleanse Manhattan with. The action is swift, immediate, and packs a punch on every step of its power trip. It hits that glorious balance of looking and feeling great without ever becoming needlessly complex. Its malleable form fits perfectly around the bloodied fist that is Dylan, our anti-hero, like a glove scuffed with the concrete you rip up from the world's streets with every ground-shattering impact. Those who have played any of the Finnish Studios games will not be surprised to hear that the action is slick, but the fact that its first full swing at melee combat has come together so well is certainly impressive. But while Resonant marks Remedy's first foray into melee, it's been thinking about close quarters combat for a long time.
When we were working on the first Control game, we already had ideas for making melee. Control does have melee, but we actually wanted to make a service weapon melee form back in the day. We even had concept art and everything for that.
Alas, that never came to fruition. Already a new beginning for the studio, the desire to inject melee into Control fell by the wayside due to other ambitions.
It was important to me that we started to think of it as a RPG experience. With the first game, we wanted to kind of start from a place of familiarity. So we were known for doing third-person, shooters and so on. And it felt like that's the right way to start that experiment in a way, what's the Remedy version of an RPG franchise. So we took what we're kind of known for and started to kind of bring in things like, we're gonna have side quests, or you can customize your character even further than in any other game before. And you can actually pick choices and conversations with other characters. They were new things that we've never done before actually in any Remedy game.
One non-negotiable for Control though has been placing aggression at the core of combat. Remedy never wants you to hide as you chase down enemies. Rather, you should use the architecture of Resonant's arenas as parkour pathways to reach them, rather than nooks to take cover in. That's evident from even just a glance at Resonant's action, as Dylan dashes, double jumps and dives headlong into hordes of glowing red hiss with reckless abandon, soaking up the blue shards of health that cascades from his victims. Switching to melee feels a natural evolution for the series, and a logical step that builds on the lessons learned through the original's shooter-centric design.
What we wanted to do was make people be more aggressive and use the supernatural powers that they have as well and move around, use levitate and all of those cool moves that we gave to the player. But we did, I think a pretty good job to kind of bring in the combination of abilities and shooting. But there was this kind of thinking at the back of my head when we were working on the first Control game that, melee, that would make a lot of sense because there's something about it being intuitive, that you want to organically get close to the enemies.
Enter the Aberant, an object of power gifted to Dylan by his sister Jessie. Your first choice will be to select which fits 3 primary modes you'll wield for the story's opening act. You have the quick-hitting, high-critting dual blades, known as Flurry, the Slice, best used for taking on enemies one-on-one for big damage, and Slash, which is best used for crowd control due to its sweeping nature. Beyond these basic attacks is where the aforementioned RPG aspirations enter the mix. From here, you can construct a version of your chosen weapon and a version of your Dylan that best suits your playstyle.
We have 3 slots for the Aberant. We have the primary, the secondary, and the combo ender. And what happens is that you can mix and match those however you like, but those are not different weapons. Those are different shapes that Aberant takes when you press the button. So what we wanted to happen is we wanted the player to see this transformation in real time as much as possible. So for instance, you start a combo with dual blades, and then if you continue that combo, you will switch to the combo ender, and then it will be, for instance, like this cleaving, spinning weapon that hits enemies in a big arc, and you will see the transformation.
There are definitely character action influences to be felt when playing Control Resonant, with some of the enemy juggling and outlandishly stylish abilities conjuring up images of Platinum games of the past. But for those whose tastes are more solidly rooted in Max Payne than Bayonetta, this sequel still very much uses its predecessor as its main inspiration. Part of what made 2019's Control so enjoyable to play was how powerful it made you feel via relatively simple inputs on the controller. See tapping a button to launch a 2-ton chunk of concrete at an enemy. It's a sentiment carried over here, with complex button combos neglected in favour of satisfying simplicity, born out of the builds you'll set up in the menus.
We want everything to feel immediate. You press the button, thing happens. That's the philosophy of design. You press square, Dylan does the attack. You press R1, Dylan does the ability. There is no like, I'm switching to the mode of this and then I am pressing another button or holding a modifier key. We did prototype all of these things, and those slowed down combat quite a lot, and we don't want you thinking about that. We want everything to feel immediate and visceral.
Further to that philosophy of immediacy is the team's refusal to incorporate a parry into Dylan's skill set. There is a shield, one formed from levitating rock that I had a glorious time using to bulldoze into groups of enemies and bash them into a stunned state, but no way to turn your foe's attacks against them. Again, it's all in the name of momentum and staying on the front foot. A design choice that proves a welcome breath of fresh air in a genre where so many games employ a parry mechanic at their core.
We did prototype a parry and deflect mechanics, and we decided to remove them from the game. The idea behind the combat system of Control Resonant is that offense is the best defense. When we implemented these kinds of defensive mechanics, we noticed that immediately what we're doing when we're playing the game is we're waiting for enemies to do something to press the button in return. And that just didn't seem to fit the philosophy that we had for the combat system.
Resonant is not quite an open world game, it's made up of multiple expansive city zones. Remedy's decision to have Control breach the walls of the oldest house and let its destructively parasitic hiss loose on the streets of New York opens up a new increased verticality and level design, and, as a result, a new approach to encounter design. It may sound counterintuitive for a series transitioning from range to melee combat to increase the number of airborne enemies, but that's exactly what Dylan's movement abilities allow for.
He's very nimble and he's very fast, and he can also stay airborne for a long amount of time. And a lot of the enemies now, there's a lot more enemy types that can also follow Dylan wherever he goes. A lot of flying enemies too, which of course makes it easier to do at like this massively epic scale vertical levels.
When you think about melee games, most melee games you'll find, with some exceptions, are going to be you walk into a combat arena, you stand in the middle, and enemies are coming to you. And your job is to press the button with the right sequence, and they just die one by one. And the next enemy comes, and then the next enemy comes. And that's kind of how those games used to work. We wanted to challenge that a little bit with Resonant, and that's a very difficult thing to design because we can't just point to another game and say, okay, we're going to do it like this other game. We had to figure it out. What does it exactly mean? So the player in this game is going to be chasing monsters around. And we wanted that chasing of the monsters around and going to them to defeat them to be fun. And that means that they needed to be at different heights, they needed to be of different sizes. Some of them needed to be, on walls or on the roof, so that you can figure out like also a little traversal puzzle about how to get there. Use your navigation abilities, of which you have a lot of. And of course, flying enemies are a big part of that because, they have another dimension in which they can navigate. And we just noticed it was really fun to knock them down as well from the height, so they fall on the ground, and then you can, ground slam into them, and everybody dies, and that's kind of like the experience.
Movement is a huge part of Control Resonant. with each of Dylan's key traversal abilities unlocked by completing dungeon-like fault missions, such as the trippy train-riddled one revealed in our first drop of this month's IGN First. In that level, I got to play around with Reach, Resonant's equivalent of a grappling hook, and an ability inspired by one action game close to Resonant's director's heart.
I can work with this.
I was really captivated early on by Sekiro, and it happened to come out in the same year than we did with the first game. It did things with movement through the world that I felt like this is super cool and so on. So it did make me think a bit about like, okay, where do we go from here? I love the simplicity of it and the kind of a straightforward journey that the character had through a very dense world with a lot of like layers and stories and so on.
From my few hours with Control Resonant, the level of depth within its combat alone was clear to see. The same can be said for so much else in the game too. From its monstrous bosses and shifting world, to the stories and characters that inhabit it, there's a deep well to sink into here, much of which we'll take a dip into later on this month's IGN First. For more on Control Resonant, check out our latest gameplay video, and for everything else, stick with IGN.